almost 4 weeks into my radiation and chemo, things started to go not as well for me with my chemo. Radiation's going well, but my chemo not as well. I didn't feel any different, but my blood test results were coming back not as good. So I was having regular blood tests and the results were coming back quite quickly. My nurse pulled me aside after my radiation and said, we need to monitor you a little more closely because your platelets have dropped from 259 down to 140 and your white blood cell counts have dropped in half as well. So that wasn't good. It meant that I was more prone to infection, and if I bumped myself bleeding, I would bruise more easily and my blood would clot as well. So I just had to be careful and mindful. So things were okay for a few days, and then over the weekend, and then Monday I came in for treatment again, and I had my blood tests. I didn't need to wait at the hospital for them. I was allowed to go home. And I had my rest in the afternoon like I normally do. When I woke up, I'd missed 3 calls from my nurse, my beautiful nurse, Grace. And I knew full well what she was going to tell me when I called her back, and I really didn't want to call her back, but I knew I had to. And when I rang, she said to me that my platelets had dropped from 140 down to 25, and I had to stop chemo immediately. But no, I really didn't want to. I only had 11 more days of chemo to go, and I wanted to continue to do that. Lucy had said to me that the radiation was to put my tumour to sleep and the chemo was to keep it asleep. So in my mind, if I stopped chemo, what was going to keep this thing asleep? So I was really quite sad and despondent. There was nothing I could do about it. I had to stop. I had to listen to what they said. And I thought, I'm still getting the radiation, so we'll continue with that. But I had to stop the chemo medication. My bloods continued to drop and my platelets were not being kind to me. So over the next week, they dropped down to as low as 7. So under 10, you have to have a platelet transfusion. So I ended up going in for 2 transfusions. And my white blood cells and my newts dropped quite low as well. So I had to be really careful not to be around anyone that was sick and keep myself as well as possible. I went in for my radiation, and that meant I had 3 left. So I was on the home straight and pretty close to the finish line. My bloods were pretty low that day, and they told me to really monitor them. If my temperature went up or down, if it got too high or too low, or I was remotely feeling unwell, I had to call the emergency number and take myself straight to hospital. So that night, my temperature got to 38.1, and I rang the emergency number. They told me to get into the hospital within 30 minutes and they would fast track me through emergency. And I was not really quite sure why it was so urgent, but apparently you can have underlying, and a lot of people wait and don't take themselves off to emergency, and you've got no capacity to fight infection, and that's when you get really unwell. So I literally arrived at emergency at the Alfred And they took me straight through, hooked me up to machines, straight onto antibiotic drips. And I was to end up staying in hospital for 5 days, which I was quite astounded about because I really didn't feel that unwell, but I clearly was not well. I had 3 radiation treatments to go, and I was determined that I was going to finish those because my granddaughter was due the day after my final treatment. And the doctors had said to me over the weekend that I could have my radiation on the Monday. And then on the Monday, that got changed. And they said I could just wait until I was out of hospital and then I can just finish the radiation later. It's probably the first time I had a fairly big meltdown because in my mind I wasn't missing a single treatment. I was finishing my radiation before my granddaughter was born, not after or not on the day. So I didn't let it go, and I made quite a few phone calls. My nurse, Grace, was beautiful. I ended up getting my radiations done, and I met Courtney, my clinician, downstairs. She was beautiful and looked after me. They wheeled me down for radiation. So I got to have my last 3 radiations while I was in hospital. Made it easier to get in and out of there because I was already there. So I was pretty happy that I got to finish on the 4th of July. My sister brought me in some clothes so that I could get a bit dressed up and make myself feel pretty special and ring that bell with my family and friends. I'd made it. I made the 6 weeks. I didn't make all of the chemo, but I'd made the 6 weeks of radiation. I was putting this to sleep, and it was going to stay asleep. Amazing!